in the early 2000s.
Okay.
Never been out of the country. So where's the first country you should go to when you've never been out of the country?
Alaska.
Antarctica, of course. If I look at the crew and see stress on their face, I'm going to be worried. But if I get up there and I see that they're just like, it's another day at the office, then, I can be relaxed. You arrive in at night and it was stormy and rainy and you don't see anything. You don't even know what the topography is going to be like or anything. And all night long when we got there, I kept hearing what I thought were gunshots. And I'm like, holy. He was fighting the waves so much that he finally just gave up and he just let the ship go with the waves, which wasn't the direction we were supposed to go.
This sounds kind of frightening. Our listeners aren't going to be signing up for this trip. If
it was.
Welcome to the Wild and Exposed podcast, the wildlife photography and adventure podcast featuring hosts Michael Morrow, Ron Hayes, and myself, Mark Raycroft. Today we have a special podcast where Mike is going to take us through the adventure he had to Antarctica and Patagonia that took 1 month. And it is epic.
Well, I don't know how epic it is, but it was pretty fun.
It's an epic destination.
It is.
There.
That's the whole reason I went there.
Let's start with that, right?
Because who wouldn't? So, this was in the early 2000s.
Okay.
Never been out of the country. So where's the first country you should go to when you've never been out of the country?
Alaska.
Antarctica, of course. Most people, when they set these goals, they say they want to go to all 7 countries, right?
Continents.
Or continents. I kept saying country the whole time, right? Continents, right? So you're like, well, let's go to Africa or let's go to Europe.
Sure.
Or let's go, just destinations that are
There's so
pretty
much
common.
to learn at each, but for wildlife, nature, landscape, ecology, I mean, Antarctica is right at the top of the list, right?
By far and away for me. When I got the chance, I was like, let's do this.
Right. So what was the motive of the trip?
So a buddy of mine got hired. So the deal is you take off from the southern tip of South America. Mm-hmm. There's some boats that leave from Australia too. So southern tip of South America, Tierra del Fuego, is kind of the launch part. And the only way you can get there as a private citizen and when you're not working for a government is to ride a boat.
Okay.
So if you're working at McMurdo Station for the U.S. government,
as a researcher,
you can fly in.
Okay.
And so they'll land it, but generally that's in the winter time.
What month did you go?
We were there in their summer, so we were there in March.
Okay.
So to get there, you go to the southern tip of South America. So actually you're hitting South America as a continent before you actually hit Antarctica, just because that's how it goes.
Yeah, you can't check it off that easily, but yeah, you've
Right,
been there.
right.
But there's more.
Right, there's
okay.
more.
All right.
So you take off, and it's 2 days. Well, it's supposed to be a day and a half to go from the southern tip to the Antarctic Peninsula, which is where we were, it's the closest place that you can get to.
And this is probably like on a luxury cruise liner?
No. So I had no idea what it was going to be, right? Mm-hmm. And there are different styles of ships that go down there, but so my buddy got hired because it takes a day and a half, and it's rough water.
Always.
They say it's the roughest water in the world.
Really?
It's the Drake Passage.
Sure.
It's where all these waters are meeting, and it's just angry all the time. A lot of people I've talked to that have done it have been across, and it's totally flat water. Well, when we got there, it was like angry seas. And most people have never been on a boat before that are doing this. So what happens is over a day and a half, you got most people sick and groggy, and you don't have your sea legs. And so these ships will hire photographers to come in and do presentations to take people's mind off of it. Mm-hmm. So I got brought in for that. So I just did presentations. It was right at the start of digital in 2000, early 2000s. So I kind of came in and I did a bunch of stuff with digital cameras and tried to teach people how to use them. And then when we actually got to the continent, then we were there to help all these people get cool pictures of it. So that's why we actually went there. Got hired to do it. I think if you want to go to Antarctica now, you're going to spend about $10,000. Mm-hmm. We did it. That trip cost me $1,000. I didn't get paid to go.
Right.
But I got a huge discount.
What an amazing opportunity for that price.
And then, right? For $1,000, who's going to turn it down?
Right.
So that's what we did. So we went there. We spent. The cool thing about it is you're on the ship. You asked about a luxury liner.
Right.
This was an old Russian icebreaker. It only had like 100 rooms in it. So I think with
all
crew,
converted to rooms for people, small rooms.
small rooms.
100.
Now, as a presenter on the ship, I got a room on top of the ship, which
Really?
was super cool because when you're crossing the Drake, that boat and the stabilizers on this boat happen to be broke. And I don't really know much about boats, but apparently stabilizers will keep the boat from
A lot
doing
of the
too much of
sway,
this.
yeah.
Rocking.
But these weren't working. So what you would do is you would lay in your bunk and the boat would be swaying in these waters and I could be laying flat and I remember looking and I'd be looking at the ocean and the next minute I'd be looking at the sky. And it was like that for hours and hours and hours as we're crossing the Drake.
Was it turbulent enough that the waves were breaking over the bow?
Huge.
Really?
Huge. And the captain of the ship, he's the only one that spoke English. It was Russian and the whole crew was Russian. So you would go to, he's like, you can come up to the, what do they call it, the deck?
Sure.
Anytime you want. So we did quite often. And more than anything, I was up there. Yeah, you're a little leery, right? Because, you're crossing some rough water. You're in a ship that's not working 100%. It's a Russian ship and you're going to Antarctica and there's all these things in my mind. So I went up there a lot because I thought, if I look at the crew and see stress on their face, I'm going to be worried. But if I get up there and I see that they're just like, this is another day at the office, then, I can be relaxed. And that's what it was every time I went up there. But we would hit waves, and it would just totally cover the whole ship.
I have seen
The water
stunning
would-
images like that, and that alone as a outdoors wildlife photographer, that would be fun to try and film. If you have to be in that situation, and if unfortunately it's that rough, take advantage of the opportunity and
Totally.
film that craziness.
And it's before the day of GoPros. So I shot some pictures. I have
Right.
pictures, but I didn't do. The one bad thing, too, is when you went up there, they all smoked. Like
Oh,
trains.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And you walk into that deck, and it just like instant, like you smell
It's
like
like fog for imagery.
smoke for. So
Fog
I
noise.
didn't do it too much, but
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, right.
we
So
go.
how long did it take? Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. How long did it take to get across the passage?
So it's supposed to take a day and a half. It took us 2 days, going and coming. Coming back, it was 2 days too. So normally in decent water, it's a day and a half. So the nighttime stuff's not so bad. The daytime stuff, they needed entertainment, and that's what we did. And then when you get there, the water's pretty calm.
Mhm.
So the cool thing about being on a ship is you would go to a location like an old whaling station or an old whaling. It'd be a beach.
Are there many
With
of those in
buildings.
Antarctica?
Yeah,
I
quite a
didn't
few.
realize that.
Yeah,
I thought they were just these pocket research stations, but there was some.
they're
some-
old.
Right.
Nothing's active.
I
This is
understand.
old
Yeah,
stuff. But
that's-
yeah, there was places where there were hot springs.
Really?
In Antarctica.
Every
Again, I
beach
didn't-
we landed on, and we landed on a different beach every day,
Right.
had either grass or sand or rocks. It was awesome.
Okay,
You think of it, and I thought of it too.
Right.
When I'm buying clothes to go down there, I'm like, oh, I gotta get super double insulated, blah blah blah. Every day it was like in the 40s. It wasn't warm, but it
Is
was
that-
Fahrenheit.
tolerable. 40s
That's typical in the summer.
where we were at.
Right.
Now we're pretty far north, right? Because the peninsula is pretty far north, so it wasn't too bad. And we would land. So what you do is you get to your spot, you go check out stuff, whether it's
So do you Zodiac ashore?
Yep.
Okay.
So they leave the boat out in the bay somewhere, and then they have these big, huge, long stairs that go down to Zodiacs that they take off with the crane.
Mm-hmm.
So every day, like 7 or 8 Zodiacs would go into shore, and they'd haul everybody in there, and then we spend all day on shore. And you could go check out icebergs, you could go check out tons of seals, tons of birds, like cormorants and albatross and
Mhm.
penguins, tons of penguins.
What
everywhere.
kind of seal? So leopard seal is obviously the
Leopard seal, crab eater seal.
big predator.
Yeah,
Crab eater.
crab eater. Crab eaters were everywhere.
Mhm.
And then we saw tons of whales.
No kidding.
So
What species of
humpbacks.
whales?
Humpbacks and orcas.
Mhm.
And there's more, but that's all we saw.
Mhm.
And you'd be out on the Zodiacs and you'd see the humpbacks that come up right next to you. And then They don't ever mess with the zodiac. They just
Just a
kind of
curiosity.
take a peek. And,
Sure.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
they're
pretty
intelligent
cool.
beings, right? So
Very
what's this
cool.
going by? Sure. Wow.
So
It's phenomenal.
yeah, I would love to do it again because it was the first days of digital. The cameras weren't
Right.
that great, and I shot everything on digital, and I don't really use the pictures for anything now. It was more about the experience.
Right.
But we can throw some of the pictures in here. I can show the ship and all
Right.
the different things.
Awesome.
Did you shoot landscapes and wildlife while
That's
you were
the
down
thing. People ask me all the time. So, all the continents. So I've been to 6 of the 7 continents now. And
Can I ask which is waiting? What's the last
Australia.
one? Australia. We can fix that.
I know.
We can fix that next year.
That's the one I wanted to go to the most, too. Australia is the one that I can remember as a kid. I would have a map, a National Geographic map on my wall
Right.
of Australia. And for some reason, it just always intrigued me. Maybe it was Crocodile Dundee or I don't know what it was, and I still haven't been there.
All right, sidebar on planning the Australia-New Zealand trip.
Yeah, I would love to do it. I had a buddy that did Australia 30 days, and he drove around the whole country.
Will you do sharks with me? Can we do great white sharks?
I would do it. I'm not a scuba diver or
We have a
But I
year.
would
We have a
figure it
whole
out.
year.
You can
I'd figure it out.
you can snorkel with
Yeah.
great white in the cage. Yeah.
I'd try it.
Oh, you don't have to have scuba gear on. I assumed you were submerged enough.
Don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to photograph it, I would imagine that
Right.
you would want scuba gear on.
Yeah, I would think it'd be better. Although in those cages, and don't they just pipe air down too? Because those cages don't have to go very far. So
Yeah,
I
they
think they can
may-
even
they
just
may
send
have
the air
a-
down to you,
Yeah.
Right.
so you don't have to have the tanks on or anything.
That would make sense.
I'd really want to do a whale shark too.
Let's do that. Let's plan for that. Let's talk about it and maybe get into those details on another podcast.
Yeah.
That's number 7. Well, that's
Yeah,
I don't know anybody who's been that I can think off the top of my head of friends and family that can say they've been to 6. So that's cool. And so with the time in Antarctica, then with each bay and different day, was there much difference with any geology or animal life from one bay to the other? Or
there was lots. So like I said, every beach we landed on was ice free, so that was cool. And some were rocky beaches. Some had tons of penguins, or they might have certain species of penguin. And I should have done a little bit more research to remember all the different types of penguins we saw. Gentoo, Adelie penguins. There's the king penguins and the emperor penguin.
Right.
But those aren't really on Antarctica. You see those all on South Georgia Island.
Right. Falklands and
Yeah,
South Georgia.
Falklands.
Yeah. Yep.
But there was one king penguin
Really?
in this colony
Oh, that's
of
hilarious.
these small little penguins. And we were asking all the people that had done this a lot, why is this guy here? And they said he must have just got blown off course in a storm or something. But he shouldn't have been there. But it was cool because I got to see one. Because we didn't go to South Georgia or the Falklands or anything like that. That's a whole different trip.
Right.
It would be great to do the whole Antarctica thing where you did those islands and then went down
And
to
then
the
went
peninsula.
south.
and-
Yeah.
But as far as seeing different stuff, man, every beach was different. The spectacular views were always icebergs, or would have been icebergs. Others, it would just be ice that came almost to the beach, but the beach was always clear. So then you could experience those just massive glaciers. Some would be wildlife. There would be huge rookeries of different cormorants and albatross and all the cool birds that you see down there. So the one thing I remember about one of them is there was tons of penguins. And it's cool because you can, these penguins have no predators other than the
In
leopards.
the water.
Yeah.
Right.
But when they're on shore, it's like, so you can walk right up to them, right? And obviously they're not scared, and you can lay down and they'll waddle right past you, and
Lay down with a wide angle and get
get some really cool stuff. So you would these icebergs or these glaciers are calving all the time, and you'll hear it just constant. Something is breaking somewhere, and ice is falling in somewhere all the time. So if you were around a bunch of penguins and you heard an ice calve or a glacier calve, if the penguins started running, you better run
No
because the
kidding.
waves were going to hit the beach.
Really?
But if the penguins just stayed still,
And
it's not big
they
enough.
knew that.
They knew just from the
and
sound.
they can swim so well. Why do they care?
I don't know, but they would all run up to the edge
Right.
and get out of the water, and then when it was gone, then they'd all come back.
That's awesome.
That's what I love about what we do, to be able to witness and interpret that kind of behavior. That how would you know that?
Yeah, you
otherwise, right?
And
who
we
would
figured it
guess?
out really quick. It's like, okay, the penguins are running. We better
Let's go.
Yeah, everybody run.
Right.
So that was cool.
Was there any elephant seals down there?
Yep.
Or is that over
And
there?
they're huge.
They are a huge animal.
It's amazing, and you could walk right by them, but it was intimidating. They aren't gonna. Well, you wouldn't think they would do anything. The fur seals, they were scary.
Really?
They would
Just
run you down,
A little more aggressive.
and they've got some sharp teeth, and I think they could do some damage. I mean, you're not gonna get hurt by them as long as you keep your distance and
Right.
walk around. But
Use common sense.
yeah, use common sense. Yeah, I would do that trip again in a heartbeat.
So you, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, finish what you're gonna say. Then I'll ask.
Well, I didn't have anything. I was just gonna.
Well, I was just gonna ask. So it was two days getting there, and then a week or so
We were
in
there
these bays.
like 7 or 8 days there, and then 2 days coming back. I don't remember exactly.
Did you have any crazy weather, or was it a good trip weather-wise?
Once
Day
we
after
were
day?
down there, it was great.
Yeah, it's just the rough water.
Yeah. And what I was going to say earlier, so every day you land on a beach, and then throughout the night, while we're all sleeping, the captain's taking us to a different part. So every morning we'd wake up in a whole new spot,
Ta-da.
which was awesome.
Right.
And you're like, what are we going to see now? Or throughout the night, he'd be sailing, or what do they call it? Sailing, I guess. On
Well,
a
just
big ship like
navigating,
that. Navigating
yes.
whatever through the waters or through all these fjords kind of looking things. And, every now and then we'd hit an iceberg. And you'd be
Seriously?
like, whoa.
There'd be contact?
Yeah.
I see.
But
So
it's
this-
at night, and you're just like,
I guess it's an icebreaker, right? So
Yeah.
they're not.
yeah, they
You
weren't
keep
too worried
thinking of
about it.
things way back to the Titanic. And
There
you
was
should not
one that
hit icebergs
sank a
because
couple
you don't know how
of years
big they
ago.
are underneath, right?
Right.
Or how they're formed underneath.
Right.
How do you know?
Yeah, and they're way bigger underneath than they're what's showing. So,
Mhm.
but you get to places where their icebergs were beached. I forget what they call them. I don't know. It come to me, but and the shapes and just and there would be it'd be like an iceberg graveyard
Huh.
because they'd all be beached and then just every different shape and size and
Some of the color with the light.
Color.
I've
Yeah,
seen
the
some really
blues.
cool images
Yeah.
mhm.
with the right light going through.
I would love now. So that's 20 years ago, right?
Right.
That was really early on in my career, and I don't think I was as developed as my eye, and I wasn't as
You
developed.
must have
as
been really young 20 years ago, just for the record. Yeah.
pup.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, pup. I wish I could go back now because I think what I would be able to do now compared to what I did then,
Well, equipment.
with the video, but also stills,
Imagine putting a GoPro on the front of that ship through the waves.
and it would make it right.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah, it'd be pretty sweet.
Be fun to do.
The one thing about that. So when you take a piece of sheet metal, let's say a big piece, 4 feet by 2 feet,
Okay.
and like eighth inch thick
Yes.
sheet metal,
Right.
and you take it and you go, whoa,
Yes.
and you can run waves through it. That would do
Every
it to the
Saturday
ship.
afternoon. Sorry.
The
You
ship
did it
would
to
do
the
that.
boat.
Every
Oh.
time we hit a big wave like that,
You would hear that?
the wave would go
So
through.
it's like
You'd feel it.
a reverberation going through the.
You wouldn't hear it. You would feel it.
You'd
Crazy.
You
feel
would
it.
feel that wave go all the way through the ship. And that's like kind
That's
of
unnerving.
That'd probably make
Yeah.
it tough for me to sleep. Not
Yeah.
gonna lie.
And I wasn't sure if I was going to get motion sick.
Wow, that's
Or being on a
lot of
boat.
people must have been right. with
So going down, I thought, I don't really want to be sick. So I did the patch. And it worked.
Yeah.
I didn't get sick. That first morning for breakfast, though,
that. So this is a patch. What's in the patch? Because
it's like an antihistamine. I think it just dries you out. And then if you could dry it out and you don't, I think
Doesn't
it's the
mess
fluid.
with your inner ear.
Yeah. If you
Okay.
can, and for me
it's
it
like a
worked.
24-hour adhesive little Band-Aid patch. You put it.
But it's kind of miserable because it does dry you out. You wake up in the middle of the night and you're like,
No kidding.
you
So
know,
can you
it's
just drink more fluids to compensate for that?
yeah, but it
Then it-
still keeps you dry.
Really?
Dry.
Huh.
So after that day, I took it off, and then
Just to get
I made
used
it
to
through
it.
the rest of the trip. And then on the way back, I thought, I'm going to try it without. And it wasn't perfect. I'm not going to. I didn't throw up. I didn't get sick.
Mhm.
But there were some moments where I was a little queasy, where I was like,
Right.
But
Equally rough on the way back.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, it was
Okay.
crazy. In fact, it was so rough on the way back that he was fighting the waves so much that he finally just gave up and he just let the ship go with the waves, which wasn't the direction we were supposed
This
to go.
sounds kind of frightening. Our listeners aren't going to be signing up for this trip if they
It
keep-
was. Yeah, I have to be honest. I was a little bit like, anywhere I
Well,
go
an
in the
epic
world.
adventure. I see that side of the coin, but also, I mean, for people who aren't used to it, and maybe they navigate these waters so frequently they know they can do it. But for people who don't witness that, it's like this is it moment.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and if you don't get butterflies in your stomach from going someplace new and having a new adventure, I feel like you're not.
Nicely
it's
put.
You're not in
too
it.
easy.
Yeah.
So I get excited when I get that. I don't like that feeling, but I do like that feeling. It's one of those things where you're just like so unsure. But the more of it you do, the easier it gets everywhere I go. But it was awesome experience. The one last thing about the boat, when we were traveling across, so they'd have all these meals. And when we were down there, if there was going to be a little rough water when we were traveling, they would put cotton tablecloths on all the tables at the mess hall, in the mess hall.
Keep plates on the table.
They would wet them. They would make them all wet, and then the plates would stay on the table if you were in rough water. So if you showed up for lunch or dinner or whatever, and the tablecloths were dry, you were like, smooth water,
Be a
no
good day.
problems. But if you showed up and they were wet, you kind of knew that. And then the other thing that I was going to say, there was I think there was 120 people on that ship going down there. And that first morning for breakfast, there was only 3 of us that showed up for breakfast.
Really?
Yeah.
That says all of it right
There
there.
was, and I referenced it earlier. I had a room in the top of the ship. So I had these huge windows.
Right.
And I was high enough up, even in that rough water, I wasn't going to get wet. But most of the people in this ship are staying down on the bottom with the little portholes that are constantly wet. So they couldn't even open up their windows to get fresh air. So I think that plays on it too. And then it's the diesel motors or diesel engines or whatever
Right.
down there, and you smell that exhaust sometimes. And, you think the rough water, that exhaust, the heat, people just were, everybody walked around with a barf bag.
Just in case. I might have had a utility belt full of them. But I don't know.
And then in some of that rough water, I remember too, because you're on the ship and it's also new and you want to go explore everything, because really the only thing you can do is get on go around the ship. And I'd go down on the bottom just to see what it was like. And when you'd walk, it'd be like a ping pong ball going against, you just wham, and then you hit the other side of the hall, wham. You just keep, and everybody's doing it, and you're trying to avoid all the barf bags. The place where we did the presentation, you're familiar with the cruise ship. This isn't a cruise ship by any means, but
Right.
they did have a nice little area where, like an entertainment place, where it was a hardwood floor in there, and then they had a little bar. But all the chairs were like bolted to the floor
Oh, yeah.
because, it was just crazy. Everything about it was cool.
So despite all that, and of course from what you're saying, we all love adventure, and you thrived on that, and it makes the story that much more memorable, the experience story for you. All said, given the turbulent waters and the motion with the boat, you would do it again.
In 2 seconds.
There you
If
go.
somebody called me right now and said, let's go to, I got this
Right.
deal.
Right.
I would go.
Right.
But
No
that
question.
wasn't the end of it, though.
The
As far
trip?
as the adventure.
No, so since we were down there, we were like, we're in South America, and when are we coming back? Who knows, right? So we decided, before we even left, we decided this. Let's just do Patagonia, because you're there. You're in Tierra del Fuego, and you drive north, 3 or 4 hours, and you're basically in Patagonia.
Mhm.
All the really famous places that Patagonia is known for, with the Andes and the El Chalten, the real famous rock climbing place down there. And so we just basically rented 2 cars, and this was in the early 2000s, so rental cars were pretty hard to come by down there. There wasn't a Avis or a Hertz rental car, so we actually had to hire somebody that, before we ever left, and they secured cars for us. And I think what we got is 2 personal cars that belonged to just like you or I here, and they rented them to us. And I think it was $150 a day for each truck. We had 2 trucks,
And
2 little like Nissan.
so there were
little
vehicles
trucks.
you were familiar enough with. It wasn't a
Yeah,
problem
totally.
operating.
Everything was the same.
Right.
One was really fancy. One had a roll bar, and we had big old lights and all that cool stuff. And then one was just pretty much a stock
Mm-hmm.
truck. But it was perfect for traveling because we didn't know either what we were going up against. We'd never been down there. So most of the highways at that time, I've heard that it's changed a little bit, but most of the highways are just basically gravel
Right.
roads. And you just travel. I mean, these people travel way too fast for a gravel road for me.
Right.
But, you know, they're going 60 miles an hour down a gravel road. But you think of a gravel road in the U.S., it's usually a 2-lane gravel road.
Right.
These were like 4-lane highways, but they were all gravel instead of being paved at that time. But I think most of those have been paved since.
Mm-hmm.
But we from Argentina to Chile, back to Argentina, and then we again, you know, we must have did, I don't know, 5 or 6 border crossings.
Were you
back and
camping?
forth. Camping. Sometimes we'd stay in what they call hosteria.
Hosteria.
And
that's a hostel.
No, it's like our little motels.
Okay, so
But
it's just accommodation.
Yeah, and we didn't have any plans. We didn't want any plans. We wanted to be where we wanted to be when we wanted to be there. So we didn't schedule anything out. And you'd always find something. Now, we did stay in one that was a little funky. It was like out of the Old West.
Right.
It's like an old boarding house. Out in the middle of nowhere, and then there's this one building. It was a 2-story building, and it said rooms or something, and we stopped in there, and it was, I don't know, $40. But it was basically just cots. There was like 20 cots lined up, and that's what you got. There was no there's no room, no nothing. You just basically had your cot, and you're sleeping with who knows who else is there. You just kind of roll in, and that's what it was. But then we went to others that were full on, just like our motels, but super nice. I mean, it's just plush and beautiful.
And you, when you touched on this earlier, prior to the podcast, you mentioned how friendly and inviting the people were too,
Totally.
and the food and the meals and
The food, I didn't know what to expect, right? Because you go to a
Right.
different country, and I have to say, China was the absolute worst food I've ever had.
really.
Yeah, but I'm not.
Is it because it was different? Is it and from what you're used to, or was it
It's
just
definitely that. I mean, because they love it. I found one that I liked in China. Now we're changing the subject, but in China, I found noodles and stuff like that I really liked.
Right.
But they would serve. If you've ever been to an Asian restaurant,
Right.
and you get those tables that are constantly turning. Have you ever ate at a place
I haven't,
like that?
but I've heard it's like a buffet then that you take
Kinda.
from as it comes,
Yeah.
but it's just moving around. You can make your selection.
Yeah, so
Okay,
you'd have
that's
this
how I
huge
envision it.
table, and whoever's preparing the food would bring out a dish and another dish, and it just lines the table. And when it passes you, you better get it. But we were served like turtle soup.
So you weren't comfortable with some of it. I would feel.
I
that
tried
way.
it,
Okay, good on
but
you.
it's like you're not used to it, and
Right.
and then the thought of, I just didn't, you see turtles in really mucky, ugly water. Not
Well, it depends on.
that
yeah,
makes a difference, but
that's enough. Yeah,
yeah. But that's a whole besides the
that's
point.
another whole
Down
subject.
there,
Right.
I didn't know what to expect.
So in Argentina, Chile would be good food wise and accommodation wise. I mean, did you notice any difference between those countries?
They were about the same,
Okay.
and the predominant food was beef,
Okay.
steaks.
Always, yeah.
Yeah, if you ever go to a Brazilian barbecue or a Brazilian meat house here
Right.
in the States, where they have these
Just
big
have it on the
skewers of
skewer.
meat,
Yep.
I see.
and they just line up. They have these really elaborate fireplaces or cooking fires. They're really long. It's like a fireplace you find in a house, only they're 20 feet long. And they just have these skewers of meat just sticking in there cooking. And then they just bring that skewer over and you take whatever. Or you could have just a traditional steak, much like we have here. So
Okay.
the food was awesome.
Food was good.
And the wine was good. I'm not a wine connoisseur, but the people I was with were, and they were sampling all this wine everywhere we went. And I like it. I just don't know anything about it. And
Chilean
they would
wine
be
is
like,
supposed
"Oh,
to be
this is
very
really
good."
good."
Yeah. My wife was born in Chile, and her mother spent a lot of her life there, and that's she almost always drinks wine from there. So
Really?
yeah.
But everywhere we went was great. But I'm not a connoisseur. I mean, I guess they were telling me the difference in the quality of the wines. The cheaper the wine, the bigger the headache, is what they told me. So I
that's a good
based
selling
everything on
point.
whether I woke up with a
How
headache.
do we
or
spin
not.
that into selling our pictures?
I don't know.
The bigger the
bigger
HDMI,
the picture, the less the headache.
the more eye relief.
Correct.
Right?
There
The
you go.
bigger the
You don't
HD
get
metal,
strain.
the more eye relief and the more you can take in. Sign up for that.
Yeah.
You'll get more out of it. It's worth the price difference.
And you should check out Mark's website for all those pictures to have that less irate.
It's there. It's there.
Well, more
It's
irate.
easy to find, and then you'll see what we're talking about. But so with Argentina, then photography-wise, since you're doing this trip, I mean, you're doing it to explore it because the opportunity is there to add on these weeks and
Right.
to travel the country. As far as taking images and recording the trip, what did you do that way back then?
So there's some really cool places, and if you've ever seen a picture in really famous 3 rock spires that are just monster spires, and you see it everywhere. That's Torre del Paine National Park, and we knew we wanted to go there, so we went there, and unbelievable. But the weather in the Andes is so persnickety. I mean, you can't count. We've been talking a lot about weather being here in Wyoming. Down there, it was like. So that's another reason we don't want to schedule.
Right.
Is you want to be able to stay. And since we were camping, we thought, well, if we get to a place that we think it's going to be really cool, let's just stay as long as it takes to get a good shot. So we stayed in Torres for probably 5 days, waiting on weather.
Mm-hmm.
But it was cool, when we didn't have the right weather, we were out exploring, we were checking out different parts of the park, and those parks are pretty cool.
Are they?
I mean, they're a lot like our parks as far as beauty and access and stuff. The one cool thing that I'll never forget is you go to the campgrounds, and there's always a campground host, much like we have here. But when you roll in, they show up with a wheelbarrow full of wood. So you can build your fire and do all kind of, and here you have to go buy your wood. They just show up and give you, and then as long as you're there, they keep your firewood stocked. And
Really welcoming party. That's nice.
yeah, totally welcome. And then every campground had showers. So they had those hot water on demand kind of
Heater?
propane things. So that was cool. I mean, we're out in the
Sure.
wilderness, and you can pretty much
Take
take
a
a
warm
shower.
shower.
Yeah, a warm shower, which was pretty awesome. So that was a cool thing about that. And then it's spectacular. I mean, the campgrounds sit in some of the, in the U.S., I think we put campgrounds in areas, or in Canada, we'll put campgrounds in just spots that are good for campgrounds and may not have the best view, or may not have
Right.
it's just, you can put a lot of campsites in. Down there, they would put them in really spectacular places where you had a view of the Torre, the big mountains, or, so you'd wake up every morning, look out the tent, and you might just see the bottoms of them or something. It was pretty cool. And the water is just blue, Lake Azul. We stayed there, camping there, and it was just the blue water of the lake. It was a lot like Canada.
Similar to the Canadian Rockies that way for the
Very
cover.
much so.
Right.
I think I told you guys earlier, if we hit Ron over the head and blindfolded him and flew him to Tierra del Fuego, and he woke up and he didn't know where he'd been flown to, if you just get up and you don't pay attention to the actual vegetation, but you just look at the mountains, it looks a lot like Anchorage, Alaska. If you wouldn't know if you
Interesting.
were there. It's
Well,
pretty cool.
the poles mirror each other in so many ways, and not just the
Right.
poles, but the continents do too,
Mhm.
right? Just flipped seasonality, and the mountain ranges, the formation of them in a similar fashion with the receding glaciers. And
Totally.
Right.
Now, if you drill down and you look at the vegetation and the wildlife, that's the dead giveaway. So, like down there, we would guanacos, which is basically like a llama. It's
Okay.
like our llamas, but these are wild. Much like you'd see pronghorn here in Wyoming.
They're like a tall alpaca, aren't they?
Yep.
A little thinner.
Yep. And they're like a reddish brown with white.
Yep.
And you'd see those. They have emus. Wild
free
emus,
range, right.
free range emus.
Okay.
So you go to places and there'll be a sign deer crossing or elk crossing.
That'd
They
be a
would have
different
an emu
experience
crossing.
for me to get the emu on the ridge line instead of the bull elk.
Yeah, totally.
It'd be different.
And they're
No,
kind
I-
of cantankerous.
Well,
They'll come. It's like the elk you photograph sometimes. They'll come get you. The guanacos won't, but
is that the place where the mountain lions are?
yeah. And we didn't see any, but the habitat you can just tell was very, very suited for a mountain lion.
Sure.
That habitat was perfect for a mountain lion.
Now, is the guanacos, is that the main prey base for those cats down there?
Yep.
Is it?
Yep, for sure. And they're very successful. And I think if you went down there with that intent, and maybe with a little help from the biologists in a park or a little help from locals, I think you would stand a pretty good shot. And I've talked to other photographers that have done it that actually have photographed. Well,
There's a guy that used to be the editor of Wyoming Wildlife Magazine, and I think he's actually leading workshops down there now. But yeah, they go down there and they see the cats every year, every time.
Yep. Yeah, and you can just tell, especially doing what we do, and we're all very familiar with certain species and certain habitats. That habitat just said, this is the perfect place for a mountain lion.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of foxes too, gray foxes. So we had a gray fox in the campground that would show up every day at our campsite, and they're not captive, but they're wild, but they're pretty habituated to people.
Right.
They don't get fed. We weren't feeding them, but they would still kind of show
They'd
up
find
and just
stuff,
be curious.
probably,
And
but-
they probably find stuff too, yeah. But they'd be curious and they'd be checking us out. And
Opportunistic.
totally,
Foxes are.
totally. It was too much fun traveling around there. And the other place we went to a big glacier called Moreno. I should have done a little bit more research. I believe it was Moreno Glacier.
Could you drive to that?
You could drive to it, and we drove to it, and we got there in the middle of the night. So we're like, okay, well, we'll just sleep in our cars and we'll be out there at sunrise. And so they have a parking lot, and then you walk these nature trails to get down to the overlook to see this big glacier that kind of terminates in this big lake. And all night long when we got there, I kept hearing what I thought were gunshots, and I'm like, holy. What are we doing? And you're arriving at night, and it was stormy and rainy,
Right.
and you don't see anything. You don't even know what the topography is going to be like or anything. And I'm hearing this, and it was the glacier calving. And this is this glacier calves more than almost any glacier in the world.
Oh, is that right?
So it's moving like several feet a day. I mean, not like just 2 or 3 feet. It's moving like 20, 30, 40 feet a day.
Wow.
So you would sit there, and if you ever want to get shots of a calving glacier, I would say this is the place to go. Because you would hear it, and that gives you just a little bit of time to know that somewhere you better get your lens on some part of that because it's going to come down. And then the one thing I remember about it is it was so big, and then the water is so big, there's no sense of scale. But then out of somewhere, there was a tour boat that would come out and go out there. And this tour, it was a big tour, and much like you would see in, maybe it's like a ferry, right? The size of a mid-sized ferry that you would see in Alaska or Seattle or whatever. It was tooling out and then you see the size of that boat compared to the size of that glacier. It was unbelievable. So you know that the size of the ice that was falling off, I mean, it had to be like house-sized pieces of ice or building-sized pieces of ice just falling just on a regular basis, just and then the waves, that was unbelievable. Pretty cool. Those are the highlights that I remember. The people were awesome. The roads, a lot of people go down there to fly fish.
Right.
And I saw some areas where it's like, wow. And I don't fly fish too much. I mean, I'll get out there every now and then, but not an aficionado at all. But you look at that water and you're like, that looks like it'd be perfect fishing. But we didn't do it.
Was there any? I've seen some pictures of some volcanoes they're active volcanoes. Kind of, you see the images and they're creating their own lightning in the storm system basically due to the eruption. Were you in any of the volcanic areas?
No, we were too far south. So I think that happens. And in reality, I think we only made it like maybe a third of the way up the country.
Right.
So there's so much more to go see. You fly into. I flew from Denver to L.A., L.A. to Buenos Aires, and Buenos Aires down to Ushuaia. Mm-hmm. So I got to see Buenos Aires, which is a little different. It's a lot further north in Argentina than anywhere we were at, and that was completely different. It's so much further north. It's a much different climate and much different, beaches, and so so many people will travel they like to drive from Alaska all the way down to the tip of Tierra del Fuego.
That's a common adventure. Well, not common, but people do it
A lot of
every
people,
year.
overlanders.
Right? Yeah, with different forms of transportation. There's camper trucks or even those on off-road motorcycles. We see them do it.
You see tons of them.
Yeah.
And we saw them down there, and we actually saw the expedition vehicles that you're talking about. They were common. They weren't common down there, but they were. You saw them, and they would have, like, you could tell they were from the U.S. or Canada, and then that had traveled down. And a lot of times when I'm in Canada or Alaska, you see a lot of those people that are coming up, and they're doing it just the reverse way.
Right.
So that I think would be the quintessential way to experience. But you got to have a year or two to do it. I would think if you want to experience everything, especially if you're going to start on the Dalton Highway,
right,
and then go all the way to Tierra del Fuego. I don't know. There's probably not that many people that have done it, but
it's hard for me to get all of the moose pictures I need if I do a trip that long, that far. But it's worth contemplating someday.
It's hard too, because as a photographer, doing what you did is the right move if you really want to be successful in a particular niche. You just focus on that niche, right?
Strategy,
but you have that desire to photograph everything, right?
Sure.
But you decided to focus on this one thing because you obviously have to make a living, and it's hard to be a generalist. And I think that's more of the route I took, where it's like, I don't want to. I want the experience. I wanted that experience, and I was like, okay, I'll not go to Alaska this year. Let's go to, somewhere else and try
Antarctica.
Yeah.
Patagonia. But the older I get, the more that appeals to me, because we all recognize, we're all young, arguably, and we want to experience a lot of these adventures, and it's a matter of when and how, and it's at this stage in our life that we have some flexibility due to our careers and what to do, so it appeals to me more and more to see as much of this amazing planet as possible.
Right.
And places like that, that's so foreign but so exciting, and you learn so much about wildlife and this planet just by, I had no idea about several of the things you mentioned. Antarctica.
Yeah, the biggest thing is it's not cold. You don't need to be wearing some sort of extreme weather.
We get that treatment a lot in Canada. People think we're living in winter year round, and winter has come and it is here for 10 years or forever, and
and that speaks to it just speaks to people that they haven't had those experiences, right? Not that they don't want to, but a lot of people are very comfortable just sitting on their couch and watching TV and experiencing life that way. So I would just say life's too short.
Right.
Go do it. Any chance you get, if anything comes up and you can any way make it happen, you got to go do it.
Right.
There's just no reason not to.
And even with what we do, if we have our niche, then this is something that we can take on as a new adventure and find a market potential and some travel, photography storyline article, whether it's online or publication or a book, or it can all be planned out with those goals in mind. So it's not just the adventure, which is worth it on its own, but for those that are in this field, it can help fund the trip or recover costs of the trip after by filming and recording it and telling about the adventure or how to do the adventure. You've mentioned so many things today that it'd be, this isn't our objective, but you could easily itemize a whole trip or guide a trip. And if you do it 2 or 3 times, you learn all of this, and those are things that you could put into some kind of media outlet, whether it's on a website or a blog or a publication or how to, and there's ways to spin this to help encourage people to live up their lives, enjoy the outdoors, and feel a little safer and more comfortable and confident in doing these trips because of your experience. Mentioning the locations you stayed at were comfortable and clean and safe, and the food was great, and
people. The one thing I would say, and I'll use my mom as an example. She gets so worried when I'm going to Africa or when I'm going to go to China or whatever. She's, because her knowledge base, and she's a very smart lady, right? Mm-hmm. But she gets a lot of her information from watching TV. Nowadays, you can get so much more and learn so much more on the internet, but she just has these preconceived, you hear all the bad stuff, right, on TV. You hear about all these bad people all over the world, and that's kind of the impression that everybody kind of tends to lean that way, I think, where it's like, oh, I don't want to go there because it sounds very dangerous. But in reality, everywhere I've been, people are so genuine. People are just, they want to do nothing but help you. And I've been to some pretty questionable areas if you listen to the news, like Zimbabwe. You know, when I was there, the government was being overthrown. Mugabe was he was getting rid of all these shanty towns. I mean, there was just like a lot of unrest, and we rolled in, and, you know, I had the butterflies going, but when you get there, and these people just are awesome. You know, all the locals just want to help you out. They want to try to teach you their language. I mean, it's just, you get that feeling. The same thing in Argentina, in Chile. It was, when they want to know as much from you as you want to know from them too, because everybody hears about North America.
How bad it is here.
How bad it is, and a lot of it, you know, so much of our media, that's one thing I was shocked about, so much of our media makes it down there. So they see the music videos, or they see some of the TV shows where it's Hollywood, right? And they think that their impression is that everybody drives a Mercedes, and everybody sings hip hop, and, you know, so they want to learn as much.
Isn't everybody into hip hop?
Why not?
They want to learn as much as everybody else. So it's a give take, and it's a.
I think that's the best way for people to learn in this life, and appreciate the planet, appreciate humanity, and the diversity of people. And I think, you know, the vast majority of people have a kind heart, you know, and it doesn't take long to figure that out. And by traveling, it gives that perspective, really, of acceptance and appreciation of all these other places and what's different that they offer, not just culturally, but landscape and the amazing everything about Antarctica, right? I mean, without going there, you're just subject, and albeit there are some great documentaries and stuff on it that shine a good light, informative, but it's nothing like putting your feet on the ground there yourself.
Right.
And then you come back from that, and then you experience these things. So for the amount of traveling that you've done, I mean, really, how's that changed your perspective? If you were to predict that you stayed in your province or state and didn't explore this planet and take opportunity when presented to do that, how different are you because of this traveling and how you perceive other people? Or
it's huge, and I try to share that with other people too. You know, if I hear somebody talking about something that they probably don't, I don't ever accuse anybody of not knowing, but if I think it's, knowing, having been there, I'm like, you know what? Right. Here's the deal. Here's my experience.
Right.
If I can just share that and make someone either do a little bit more research or think about it a little bit differently, because it's nothing but good.
Yeah.
I shouldn't, you know, you can always have your problems.
You still have to be careful and smart and have common sense.
Yeah.
But there are, you know, it's amazing how often it's a far more pleasant experience than one would anticipate given.
I think the odds of bad things happening are so slim.
It's the same with wildlife, man. It's the same with the great outdoors. Right. It's this big, scary place. Don't camp out there tonight because it could rain, it could thunder, there could be a bear.
Right.
But it could be magical. You could get up the next morning and just have your breath taken away by the scene, the weather, the sounds. We
were talking about that this morning too in our little adventure out in looking for sage grouse. I just lost my train of thought. How come that happens to me? It's because I got so much stuff going in my mind.
No, you're telling about your adventure elsewhere on the planet. We're looking at this huge, big perspective.
I know what I was going to say.
So it happens to everybody. Know what I'm saying? So go with it. No.
Right. And I woke up in Alaska not too long ago. We had an electric fence around our camp, but there's bears laying like just on the other side of the electric fence because they're just curious and you know.
Right.
But
and nothing bad
that's
happened.
safe. Nothing bad happened. I've woken up many times where there's bears around.
Right.
So don't be scared of it. Be smart about it, but don't be scared of it.
Right. I mean, if you're camping in bear country, you need to know how to camp in bear country and how to be safe and be responsible with your gear.
Yeah.
No matter if it's food gear or even just your camping gear because of the human scent and purely animal curiosity. But if you're prepared and you research that, then there's no reason for it not to be a safe and amazing experience.
Right. Chances are it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it is wildlife, but it's this planet. We live here. There's always a risk involved with exploration and adventure, but there's a risk involved with driving your car down the street tomorrow, or our car, my car, or if I go into the city and decide to cross the street, I know it says I can walk. There's a sign over there flashing, walk across the street, but that doesn't mean the person who's texting, who shouldn't be driving the car, doesn't realize they're coming to a red light. I have to watch for that. It's no different than being in wilderness. It's common sense, being prepared for the elements and being safe. And based on that philosophy, if you go for it in this life and explore these places and these adventures, and you'll have, in our opinion, and from the traveling I've done and what I continue to do and am passionate about, get the most out of this life and be able to share it with your family and friends and encourage those people, and bring that message out. So whether it's the adventure traveling that this podcast has been about and been informative and exciting and enlightening, or if it's wildlife photography and what we do professionally, it's all about getting out there and sharing that to encourage people to appreciate it, and based on the appreciation, share that knowledge and protect it in ways that are possible for us as individuals, and that's kind of a lot of what we do and why we're passionate about what we do. So this is a wild place you went to, but it wasn't all about wildlife photography. It was travel, adventure, and just soaking in the different cultures and scenery and landscape. And that's made for a great podcast. So,
you were talking, one last thing, not to make this go longer.
No, bring it if there's more.
You were talking about research stations in Antarctica.
Yes.
So there were these whaling, old, long forgotten whaling stations, but we did stop at some research stations. Everywhere I go, I like to have something I come back with, right? Some little memento, whether it's a rock that I picked up that was just really cool, or something that I bought that I think someone would appreciate, or, whatever it is. So you get to Antarctica and you're like, well, what do I get here? I mean, there's nothing. You can't go to a store.
The ice isn't going to make it home.
And then what they told us, too, is they're like, you know what? Antarctica is pristine. So untouched by man. They were like, we recommend that you don't take anything. And I was like, I agree with that. It's just like in a national park.
Yeah.
Don't be taking antlers. Don't be destroying branches and stuff. Because, you want everybody to see it and everybody to experience it. Try not to change it. So of course, I didn't take a rock. As much as I wanted to have a little piece of Antarctica that was sitting next to me every day, I didn't do it. But so I'm like, I want to bring something back. And so we ended up stopping at this research station. And, gosh, this is going to kill me. I think they were Russian, too.
Okay.
And it was coincidental. It had nothing to do with the Russian ship we were on, but it was a Russian research station. So they invited us in, and we were like, yeah, let's go check it. Let's go see what a research station's all about. And these people were stationed down there 6 months at a time. And we go in there, and I'm like, hey, could I send a postcard from here? Because at that time it was sending postcards to my mom just so that she would have a little thing from wherever I was at too, right? And they're like, yeah, you could send a postcard and I'm like, well, that's cool. I wonder how they do that. So I just wrote the little note to my mom, and I gave it to him. And then I was like, I got to bring something back. Well, these guys had all these little, they get kind of bored down there because there's not a ton of stuff. They're doing their work, but they got all this free time, right? So a lot of these guys just made stuff. Mm-hmm. But it was very Russian-made stuff, right? It has no representation of it. And it wasn't like they would carve out a penguin of something, or, these guys were making, like, the thing I bought was this, like, little egg that was painted very, like, Russian Orthodox style. Okay. I don't know if that's a style, but that's what comes to my mind. And I brought that back from Antarctica as my memento because I just was able to buy it there from these people in this research station. And just to sum up the story, that postcard ended up showing up at my mom's 6 months later.
Okay.
And it was mailed from Russia.
Oh, really? They took it back.
They brought it all the way back to Russia.
Good on them.
And sent it. And
that's awesome.
And it showed up 6 months later.
How cool is that they did that?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So it traveled all that way. It just didn't get a postal stamp from Antarctica.
How nice for those guys,
I know.
To do that.
Yeah,
Jeez.
it was pretty cool.
Right.
Pretty cool.
Wow. Well, I think that's a good story to close on.
Yeah,
For this
I do.
podcast, given the adventure in the different landscapes and the adventure through humanity and what that has meant from this trip. So thanks. Sorry.
I got one thing before you
Do
close it.
Yes.
I think we should put it out there to anybody of our audience that
Yes.
if they had questions about any one of our podcasts, or if they want to pick Ron's ear on, hey, I just saw this grouse, can you help me out?
Mhm.
Or whatever. Or if they want to know about moose,
Oh, I.
you know,
Why is it always moose, guys?
you're the moose guy.
It could be something
Okay,
else.
if
Sorry.
they
Throw
want to know
something.
about caribou
Caribou.
or wolverines, some sort of northern mammal, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be you.
Sure, bring it up.
But if you got any questions, I
Or
want
gear,
people to
equipment,
comment or to ask us.
Feedback.
Interact, yeah.
We want positive feedback. We want
Or, we want positive.
We want-
feedback.
well, we
We'll
want-
take the negative
yeah,
too, because we
constructive.
want to get better.
We
Right.
want to improve. So yeah, constructive criticism is fine. Positive feedback, liking our podcast, following our podcast, subscribing to our podcast, all of that helps us continue.
Right.
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 And
And the
contacting
knowledge
us.
base that we have. I mean, we're not experts, none of us.
Right.
But I think we have a lot of knowledge on whether
Well,
it's travel or wildlife or whatever. Hit us up because
I think I want to slow you down on that. We don't know everything. We're always learning, but we're experts in our niche and our fields because we've done it for so long and been successful at it.
right.
So we do bring a wealth of knowledge and experience in what we cover for wildlife photography and adventure, and how to do it, how to have these experiences safely and efficiently and most effectively, how to use equipment, how to interpret animal behavior. We are experts on it. We'll do that, but we don't know everything, right? And
But we can try to either point them
so
in the
we're
right
always
direction
learning as well.
or tell them what we know.
Yeah. So, but any questions, we want to receive those, through the
Yeah.
website and or through any of our social media links. Engage and let us know what you think, and by all means ask us questions. Or if there's content that you'd like us to discuss based on our knowledge base, we'd embrace that as well for other future podcasts. If some subjects you'd like to hear discussed or learn about on any of these topics that we cover.
Mhm.
So that I appreciate you bringing that up, and that's
Yeah.
important. So yeah, follow us, subscribe, and show on the likes, and I believe some of the podcast platforms, have a star system, 5 stars.
Yeah,
The best-
ratings are huge. If you
Right.
get rated,
That
the
allows
farther
us.
up your podcast goes, and the more we can do this,
The
and
more we can do it.
get supported to
Right.
do more. And
So if you feel the love, 5-star, we feel the love back and appreciate that. And so wildandexposed.com is our website, and all of our links can filter out from there, and you can view the podcast for the audio listeners. The video of each podcast is on there, and you can link to it or the various podcast platforms where it's also available.
Yep.
So thanks for tuning in on another Adventure Tale podcast from us at Wild and Exposed. Until next time, get outdoors and enjoy some fresh air.